listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We're hunkered down, perched at the edge of the world, but we're doing the news anyway. So prepare yourself to go against the grain. Disembodied, but fully present, we have another amazing show for you today. In the first hour, we'll be joined by microbiologist Dr. Dady Sherrill to discuss the current pandemic and our response compared to the responses of prior infectious disease. We'll also get into the disaster capitalism of getting rich during an emergency compared to Europe, who's just trying to deal with the crisis without necessarily prioritizing profit. You want to get to the root of an ideological problem with your society, the places that break down are great places to start the analysis. Later in the hour, we'll have one of my favorite guests of the show, environmental scientist and the most terrifying man alive, Guy McPherson. In the second hour, we're going to jump into the election news surrounding mini Super Tuesday, or at this point, let's just go with the simpler kind of Super Tuesday. We're going to dive into the states, the polling, the expectations, and the controversy around going forward with the election in the middle of a pandemic. For that matter, whether the pandemic would affect the voting pattern in the states with large elderly populations, especially since these are the population that Biden needs to win the election. And also make sure you stay tuned for our politics and arts segment, where we'll be discussing a great play that seems relevant with all of this talk of Cuba called Cecil and Fidel. Maryland and DC has been on shutdowns, but the play is off until further notice, but that still doesn't stop us from discussing it. First and foremost, though, let's start here. The Washington Post ran an interesting story yesterday around the question of whether or not Sanders supporters would back Joe Biden. They were using research from 2016 and 2020 to get a baseline between Sanders voters and other Democrats, and found a phenomena that I've noted going back to 2016 and will become even more prevalent in 2020. The Washington Post reports, quote, when Sanders supporters were told that the nomination would likely mean losing the 2020 general election, 20% of supporters were willing to switch to support another candidate, while 34% on average of the other Democratic candidates were willing to do the same. Meaning 20% of Sanders supporters were willing to switch, 34% of other average Democratic candidates were willing to switch. Like Trump, Sanders supporters are more loyal to him than voters of the other candidates. But when Sanders supporters were told that staying loyal to him would hurt the Democratic Party chances of winning in the fall, only 3% of them were willing to switch candidates. Meanwhile, 39% of Democrats whose top choice was someone other than Sanders were willing to leave with the favorite to help the party. Basically, Sanders supporters are more ideological as opposed to just voting for whoever, blue no matter who. Now, I read this and I rejoice. Finally, many of his supporters have come around to my way of thinking. My channel, since its inception, has focused on the Democratic Party more so than the Republican Party. Now, the reason is rather straightforward. It's not because there is any love for the Republican Party. It's just I have zero expectations of the Republican Party. In real terms, the party with a philosophical interest in representing the poor, the workers, the 99%, the one that gives voice to that, whether or not they do anything about it, is the Democratic Party. It is also the party that, despite giving voice, is not living up to those philosophical expectations. The left is supposed to be the conscience of this nation, and the left, instead of being the conscience of this nation, has been utter and complete cowards, cowed by a party that scares them into believing they have nowhere else to go, while get them to effectively give up the policy, concessions, and ideas that they believe in. In 2016, I came to the realization that the reason the left is ignored, the reason that the left is taken for granted, mistreated, I've called them the political equivalent of a battered wife, is because the left incentivizes its own mistreatment. The Democratic Party ignores the left for the basic, straightforward, common sense reason that they can. For decades, we've told the left, or the left has been told, you have nowhere else to go. We were told that they were the adults in the room, that the public is not on board for these policies, that the only way to go about politics is to take massive amounts of cash and to just betray your base. All of this was wrong. All of this was self-serving arguments to gas the left into docility. In real terms, the only way that you, meaning the left, will ever get their policy ideas accomplished is by accountability. That means that the only way you will ever get the Democratic Party to back your particular ideas is if they believe that they will persistently lose until they do so. This is what accountability looks like. One of the key points that the Washington Post made is that the electability argument is the argument that is least likely to get support. And yet, it is the argument that Joe Biden is making when at the last debate, he was asked, what are you going to do to get Sanders supporters? Listen to the clip. Joe Biden is asked, what would you offer Sanders supporters to get them to back you in this upcoming election?
I think that I want to make it clear. If Bernie's a nominee, I will not only support him, I will campaign for him. And I believe the people who support me will do the same thing. Because the existential threat to the United States of America is Donald Trump. It's critical. I would hope that Bernie would do the same thing if I'm the nominee and encourage all of his followers to, in fact, support me as well. Because it's much bigger than either of us. Character of the nation is on the ballot. It goes well beyond whether or not Senator Sanders and I both agree we need health care should be a right, not a privilege. We both agree we have to deal with student debt. We both agree we have to deal with education and access to education. We both agree that we have a new Green Deal to deal with the existential threat that faces humanity. We disagree on the detail of how we do it, but we don't disagree on the principle. We fundamentally disagree with this president on everything. This is a man who wants to cut Social Security, cut Medicare, not Bernie, the President of the United States. So this is much bigger than whether or not I'm the nominee or Bernie's the nominee. We must defeat Donald Trump. He is the exit. 4 more years of Donald Trump will fundamentally change the nature of who we are as a nation. We've got to restore this country's soul. That's essential. And as long as this president is there, we're not going to be able to.
That argument was able to get a lot of people to sully themselves and degrade themselves into voting for Hillary Clinton. Not in 2020. I can guarantee you this. There have been a lot of lefties who in 2016 was perfectly willing to go with this argument, oh, we got to vote for Clinton despite the fact that they cheated us. We got to vote for Clinton despite calling us Bernie Bros. We got to vote for Clinton despite her not backing our policy considerations. We got to vote. And you ask the very basic question, let's say Clinton did win. And let's say she privatized Social Security. Let's say she invaded Syria. What are you going to do in 2020? You know what they would have done? Well, we got to back Clinton again, despite the fact that she didn't get any of our policy concessions. How do you get anything done under this particular model of politics? The fact is you don't. They take you for granted because they can. And that argument that Joe Biden just made, hey, what are you going to do for Sanders supporters? The base that is ideologically driven, what are you going to do for them? Nothing. They're going to vote for me because Trump is horrible. As if that worked in 2016. It didn't. And I'm going to tell you this, it will work even less in 2020. You've called us Russian agents. You've called us Nazis. You've called us bros. You've pretended as if people of color didn't exist within the context of the party. You have attacked, slandered, called us sexist, called us racist. You've called us every name but a child of God. And now, you're looking around like, hey, wait, we need these people, the most fickle aspect of the electorate, to vote for us. What are you going to give them? Are you going to give them policy concessions, Medicare for all? Nope. You say you get rid of that. What about expansion of Social Security? Nope, you're not going to do that either. What about universal health care? Nope, not going to do that either. You even went so far as to say you don't care about the plight of the younger generation that is burdened and hit with debt. You have gone so far as to say nothing is going to fundamentally change. You're taking money from these oil companies and drug companies. So when people look at this process and they think to themselves, nothing is going to change, he doesn't get the crisis, why on earth would I vote for somebody that is not going to represent my interests? And how will my interests ever get represented if I'm willing to continuously and persistently back somebody that will not? elections are transactional. They're more than just you're going to vote for somebody, put somebody else in, or to keep somebody else out. And until that is fully understood, nothing ever changes. Until you can be gaslit, until you have nowhere else to go, nothing changes. And unfortunately, Sanders has done a disservice. If Sanders really did want to ensure that Joe Biden or some random Democrat get elected because he was terrified of Trump, if he really does believe that Trump is going to go after Social Security, Medicare, and all of these other policies, then what Sanders should have did was held his base together and not allowed that base to vote for for Biden until he got policy concessions. Because again, this is the aspect of the electorate that's much more ideological, not on this notion of electability ideological, meaning that the way you get this base, the way you get that support is policy concessions, not bogus, not incremental. The people have to actually believe that you're going to do it. And at this point, I have no such belief. And many of his supporters have no such belief, meaning that the best case scenario for Sanders would have been to hold his base and to use that base to hold the Democratic Party hostage for policy concessions. Because what won't work is what didn't work in 2016 when running around screaming for people to vote for Clinton. Yes, you will get a section, but in 2020, you will have even less than you had in 2016. And I think Sanders may have come to the conclusion himself. Unfortunately, it may be too late. Let's hear Sanders on the debate coming to the realization that Joe Biden probably may not be able to beat Trump because he can't necessarily harvest the youth vote in numbers that would be sufficient to do so. Let's hear the clip.
We are winning the generational struggle. Depending on the state, we're winning people 50 years of age or younger, big time people 30 years of age and younger. I frankly have my doubts. Look, if I lose this thing, Joe wins. Joe, I will be there for you. But I have my doubts about how you win a general election against Trump, who will be a very, very tough opponent, unless you have energy, excitement, the largest voter turnout in history. And to do that, you are going to have to bring young people who are not great voters, they don't vote in the kinds of numbers they should, into the political process. I have my doubts that Vice President Biden's campaign can generate that energy and excitement and that voter turnout.
If you believe that, then you should have been saying that from day one. He is unelectable, and you should have been hammering that point. And if you honestly was in this blue no matter who camp, then it would have behooved you to hold your base and to say, my base will be voting for somebody if they can get the policy concessions that they want. You didn't do that, which means that Joe Biden is going to run just like Clinton and just go with the notion of gaslighting people to vote for him. Let's be very clear on what is taking place. In 2016, they cheated Sanders. In 2016 and 2020, the entire party lined up against Sanders and his supporters, meaning they jumped the shark into going after the candidate and started to attack the supporters themselves. Again, Russian plants, sexist, racist, the black girl misfits. I mean, all of these names slandered him and his supporters. And now, after attacking all of the policy concessions, after saying all of this is impossible, this is in the weeds, nothing is going to fundamentally change, oh, rich people are great also, all of these things that they've been saying against the interests of their supporters. And now they've come to the conclusion, oh, right, we need these people to vote for us. The truth of the matter is, it was far more important for the Democratic Party to stop Sanders than it was to stop Trump. And if Joe Biden loses to Trump, even though a lot of the Democrats won't like it, a lot of the country will be hurt, that basically, though, this boils down to being more important to stop Bernie. Yes, Sanders. Biden is going to have a hard time winning this race. Biden should have a hard time winning this race. And the moment that lefties get on the same page with this, the better off we all will be. Bob, what do you think about this? I know you're not into the red and blue stuff. And like I said, my issue here is that I focus more so on Democrats because I don't believe Republicans are in the bag for this, meaning I don't believe Republicans are perfectly in ideological harmony with being for and in the bag for the rich. The Democratic Party, though, talks differently, even though they functionally work under the same oligarchs. So in my head, the way that you get policy concessions is not to just acquiesce and fall into this you have nowhere else to go argument. It is to be willing to walk and to get across that you are serious about being willing to walk in order to get those policy concessions. What do you think about it?
Yeah, a few things. You think of, first of all, you think of policy concessions. You can give policy concessions and gain a lot of votes. I think of what Donald Trump is going to continue to do and pick off some of the black vote, or just kind of the social justice vote, or whatever you want to call it, the reform of the criminal justice system. Vote if he continues to release people from prison like he has through the Second Chance Act. And so something like that is going to inspire and energize people. A policy is going to get people to turn out and vote for you, as opposed to what Joe Biden talks about, the fighting for the soul of the nation. What is that? That's not something that people are like, I'm going to go vote to fight for the soul of the nation. People want to know what the policy is and how to change material conditions. As for how do the Democratic establishment and longtime members of that party reach out to the young people that they've completely abandoned, I don't think they will. I think their egos are too strong, and their power is too strong to think that they have to somehow speak to or connect with these young people, that these young people will just do what's right because when they were young, they did what was right. I think of somebody like Andrew Young, the civil rights icon and former mayor of Atlanta, calling the protesters in Atlanta at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement as brats. I think of the mayor here in Washington, D.C., her complete disdain for Latino activists who are trying to get protections in a so-called sanctuary city, and seeing the mayor get verbally upset and yell at these activists. These old political establishment figureheads across the party, across the nation, have no goodwill towards young people or towards the progressive movement whatsoever. All the talk Elizabeth Warren did about how everything and how mean people are, well, those in power, those who run the cities of San Francisco, of Los Angeles, Baltimore, of New York City, of Chicago, of Washington, D.C., and elsewhere, those people have power, and they're letting people live in poverty, and they're not addressing police accountability or the climate. That, to me, is much, much worse. Their policies are corrupt. Their policies are not addressing and meeting the needs of the people. And somehow Joe Biden thinks that all of those young people that have been struggling in the streets the last 4 or 5 years against these Democratic figures are somehow just going to magically start campaigning for him. I think that's an utter joke, and they need to rethink what they're going to do, because Bernie Sanders alone campaigning for Biden is definitely not going to bring those people to the streets. Jamarl, there's a lot to cover over the next few hours. We do need to turn to our first break before we do come back talking more about COVID-19. The White House, Mike Pence, the quote-unquote czar of the COVID-19 response, giving a long press conference. Some people are saying that this is finally the most comprehensive press conference they've given, but we'll hear more from our guests after this break. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show, and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world. From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea.
From Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and, of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And, of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised, because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas, and we're talking about the latest from the national emergency here in the United States and around the world regarding the COVID-19, the novel coronavirus outbreak. We continue to talk now and turn our attention to the science behind the virus and why the disease is spreading so rapidly. We're joined by microbiologist Dr. Dadi Shari, Associate Professor of Biology, Co-Editor-in-Chief of News Junkie Post, and author of We Have Dared to Be Free. Dr. Shari, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on Political Misfits for the first time.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. Well, Doctor, you have a new piece out in newsjunkiepost.com talking about how a range of factors led to the current moment we are facing, both in terms of the novel coronavirus COVID-19 appearing in general, and now why is it spreading so quickly? Beyond the political failures and the immediate response, tell us more about how compounded environmental issues are helping accelerate the spread of the virus.
Yes, one thing that we don't discuss much is that the spread of RNA viruses like coronavirus is actually due mainly to climate change, urbanization, and industrialization. And what this means is actually you have overpopulation crowding into various urban centers that then encroaches on wildlife. And the wildlife has got a different microbial fauna than we do, and it's very normal that it should. It's perfectly healthy. We refer to it as reservoirs of disease, but it's actually like us. We have a lot of bacteria, we have viruses in our guts and so on that are harmless. They do too. And we are not supposed to come into contact with a lot of those. And when we do, which often happens through domestic animals, like dogs that go running in the woods, or cats, or livestock, then the viruses take this opportunity to evolve. They move, say, from a bat to a pangolin, as happened in COVID-19 probably, and then to humans. And then once it's in the human population, it's able to spread. Now, if, for example, this were to happen in an isolated farm somewhere, somebody might get very sick and then recover, and we'd never know about it. But if it happens in an area where there are many, many people are going to a market, for example, where they sell wildlife, as happened in the Wuhan market, where they were selling wildlife like pangolins and bats and so on. Then you have people who might have gone to the market and then work in restaurants and may work in hotels, come into contact with travelers, and very quickly then you have a situation where travelers are on airplanes. And the disease is being spread by aerosol that gets recirculated to the airplane vents. They go into different cities, and they spread the disease. Now, what I find interesting in this, in terms of social dynamics, is that the people who are traveling with COVID-19 in early January, were arriving in airports. These were people, they were not traveling, for example, because of holidays, vacations. They were business people. There were suits who were arriving in airports. And people in airports were reluctant to test them, and still are. And that, in this sense, it actually began as a kind of a disease of the rich. And now, of course, it's everywhere, and it's extremely infectious. The way this disease seems to be spreading it seems like the viruses have reached their sweet spot there, because
tell us a little bit more. There's 4 different types of known coronaviruses that humans have been testing and better understanding. Maybe what is unique about this specific virus strain, and what is allowing for it to transfer itself from one person so quickly to the other? Is it simply as just walking by somebody who happens to sneeze and you can catch it? Is it still like we saw in China, where the vast majority of cases was interfamilial or at least intercommunal passing? What is so unique about this specific strand?
We've seen coronaviruses or RNA viruses, and this flare of infections by RNA viruses, I think really was coincident with the Industrial Revolution, and it continues as we overpopulate. The flu, Spanish flu, Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, have been caused by RNA viruses. HIV is an RNA virus. Ebola is an RNA virus. Now, we've seen three coronaviruses that we all know about, but in fact, the COVID-19 infection is actually the seventh infection by coronaviruses on humans. Okay, the SARS coronavirus appeared in 2002 to 3, and it had a fatality rate of about 10% and killed 774 people in 27 countries. This was followed by MERS coronavirus, which is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus. Now, that was much more serious. It had a fatality rate of 35% with 842 deaths. SARS coronavirus was transferred probably from bats to civets and raccoon dogs to humans. MERS coronavirus was transferred from bats to camels and to humans. The current coronavirus, which is sometimes called SARS coronavirus 2, and initially it was called 2019 new coronavirus, and now it's called COVID-19, and I will be using COVID-19 interchangeably to mean the virus and to mean the disease, although what it means is a disease. This has a fatality rate of less than 3.7%. It's probably more like 2.3%. And it has reached 140 countries, infected as of today, more than 187,000 people, about 7,500 of whom have died, and 80,800 also have recovered. Iran and Spain each had more than 1,000 cases today. China had only 21 new cases and 13 deaths today. So China is now actually reaching a plateau, and it's able to treat the disease, whereas in other places it's actually getting to peak. It's reaching a peak.
Well, let me ask you about some of those treatment methods. Obviously, we're facing a large-scale quarantine or shutdown in Europe to much more extreme measures. We've also heard some conversations around potential vaccines at least being rushed to test over the next few weeks. And we even saw Donald Trump, the ever-grifting businessman, try to purchase scientists working on the cure, or at least the vaccination there, from Germany. But in totality, the best estimate is that it will take sometime between 12 and 18 months for a vaccination to be widely available. Tell us a little bit more about the ways in which science will help slow the spread of the disease and what it will look like if we're able to eradicate the continued spread and the virus.
Okay, well, I will tell you a little bit about coronaviruses. These are really small viruses. They are about 0.1 micron. They're very, very tiny. They infect cells, and then they take over the cells and then burst out by the tens. Okay, so they just multiply exponentially. These are positive strand RNA viruses. They are the biggest RNA viruses we know. Their genome, so their genetic material, is about 30,000 bases long. And they actually need the host, the human cell, to assist the infection. The host actually is the one that translates about 2/3 of the RNA information into two very, very big proteins. And then the host, again, is the one that starts to cut these big proteins that actually initially do not work into pieces that work, that then coalesce into a complex that can now work. And then this machine now, which is very big, starts to counter the host immune system, and then it starts to set itself up so that it makes more virus. And it also makes 4 proteins that we consider to be structural proteins. One of these proteins is a spike protein. And if you've seen pictures of the virus, it actually sticks on top of its surface. It looks more or less spherical, and then the proteins stick on top of the surface. This spike protein is the one that actually binds human cells. It recognizes a protein on the surface of human cells that's called ACE2, and then it binds to it. It's only about 40% identical to the spike protein in the original SARS from 2002. And in fact, it is so distinctive. This is the part that gets replicated when in diagnosis, and it's the part that's being used to see if people have made antibodies against the virus. Now, in principle, one would think that you could make a small molecule that binds to the spike and then prevents it from binding to the human cells. In practice, this is almost impossible because the virus, when it replicates itself, it deliberately makes about 3 mistakes for every virus that it makes. And so then the most fortuitous mistakes, the most lucky mistakes, will actually help it to recover from whatever you throw at it. And one thing to really bring home the point is that we've known about SARS coronavirus for 18 years, and people have been trying to develop a vaccine, and they have failed. Okay, they've had all sorts of promising molecules that have failed in drug trials. And therefore, I do not think that it is at all reasonable to expect that there's going to be a vaccine anytime soon. What I think work, in addition, of course, to diagnosis, because more than anything, we need early diagnosis. We need candid reporting of results, which is something that the Chinese have been really remarkable at doing. In addition to all the personal hygiene and ventilation, avoidance of crowd that we talk about. Now, the diagnosis in China initially was CT scans, chest X-rays, and RT-PCR, real-time reverse transcriptase PCR. Now, I should point out the reverse transcriptase PCR, real-time PCR, was only 70% accurate. Okay, they found the CT scans to actually be more than 90% accurate. The PCR is what the CDC in the United States was actually insisting that people do. And so we can assume that we're missing at least 23% of cases. There is now a better test that's been developed in South Korea, where basically that tests whether you have made antibodies against the virus's spike protein. And this test can be done in minutes. It is a color test. Anybody can do it. And that's the one they're doing in drive-thrus. And we need to do much more of that, actually. I mean, the U.S. has really, really failed in terms of the number of tests that it's been doing. It was doing only
Dr.
per million.
Dr. Sherry, I do want to, we just have a minute with you left here, and I did want to ask you about something else that was really important and on the minds of our listeners. You were in Haiti at the time of the cholera outbreak, which is brought to the island by UN workers. In an interview with our friend Gilbert Mercier, you said regarding the ensuing aid money, quote, "Of course, the stage was being set for a major infusion of aid money, but I could not have figured this out then. When Clinton moved in with his rich friends and tried to take over the governance of the country in spring 2010, I was as surprised as everyone else." Here we are now in a moment, we're seeing all sorts of federal aid money being released. Local municipalities and individuals are also rapidly giving. However, with a rush of uncentralized aid money given without proper contracts or oversight, we're going to see a lot of corruption. And with a lot of corruption, we're going to see less and less people who actually need support get that aid. I'm just curious, with about 30 seconds left here, how do we make sure that those who most need aid are getting it right now? And how do people serve as some type of watchdog for that corruption that's going to naturally take place in a time of crisis?
Well, before I do that, I would like to say that personally, as a scientist, I think that convalescent plasma is probably the thing that will help stop this pandemic. And is being used extensively in China, and there's a Japanese company that is developing it. Now, with regard to Haiti, as far as aid money, what I've been advising people is not to give any, because what we have is an incredibly corrupt system, corrupt NGOs, corrupt government. If it's possible to give money to local governance, then that's the way to go. But not NGOs and not politicians, not big outfits that are going to Haiti. Haiti, another thing I think that would be extremely helpful to Haiti is for everybody to agitate for the UN to leave. Period. They have caused not one, but two cholera epidemics. Okay? And of course, now that their numbers are down, the cholera epidemic is gone. I would argue that if they're supposed to be there to help with elections, but in fact, they have been corrupting elections. If they go, I think the elections will also improve. And so, one of the best things you could do to help Haiti is agitate for the UN to leave.
Yeah, so much of it is about agitation of government officials to act accordingly. We're also now joined live here in Washington, D.C. by Paul Jones. Paul is the president of the Columbia Heights Tenant Association. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Bob. Hey, Dr. Daly. How are you all today?
Good, good. Well, we've been talking a lot of media and politicians and the need to take care of the vulnerable that is being stressed by these politicians and media, but yet we're also hearing firsthand accounts from people like you who work with seniors in low-income housing or just residents in an impoverished, underserved communities here in Washington, D.C. There's been a rush of federal dollars going to all sorts of big banks, to potentially casinos now, to cruise lines and airlines. We also have a rush of aid that I mentioned comes in most natural disasters from people that do want to do well and give, but oftentimes that money is not directly connected with people at the grassroots level who are working hand in hand with vulnerable populations. Paul, I'm curious from your perspective here, a few days now into this quarantine, are those you are working with there at the Columbia Heights Tenant Association getting the needs they need met, or has there just been an underwhelming support from government and corporations that are meant to serve your population?
That's a great question, Bob, and I'm going to have to go with the answer of B, that we're getting underserved. Here, we have approximately about 1,000 residents, of which of those 1,000 residents, we have probably approximately about 175 that are seniors, and that's not to mention the surrounding properties in our area. I could say we probably have at least a good 500 to 600 elderly residents within a 8 to 10 block radius, and they haven't received any assistance as far as government assistance or any type of plan on what they should do or any testing being done. The only thing we've been asked to do is to stay in and stay a certain amount of feet away from each other. And my biggest thing is, once we tell the seniors to go in their homes, and if they don't, more than likely they don't have a lot of materials or resources to stockpile, if they had to stay in the house for 2 or 3 weeks, what's our next step? Here on our property, we are fortunate that we can provide some services to our residents ourselves, but that's just our property, and that's just serving approximately, like I said, about 160 to 170 elderly residents. We are in need of a plan and just a process that will assist the residents, because right now, all we hear is to stay in the house, per se.
Yeah, Jamarl, we've been hearing this across the country. That's just some 100 or 200 seniors at one location in a city of 800,000 people. There's hundreds of thousands of seniors in this city and then across the country that are in this situation. It seems like some countries like France, President Emmanuel Macron announced the country will suspend payment of taxes, rent, social charges, water, electricity, and gas. Spain's government has said they'll now nationalize its private hospitals. The Trump administration saying now today, here breaking after their press conference, that they possibly will start trying to do direct services for people. But the initial response for the Trump administration was to take care of the major corporations and banks, Jamarl. Obviously, I'm not surprised by that whatsoever, but it is going to cause a stress on people's day-to-day life, as Paul there is mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, for the most part, being a rational actor, what is the point of government if not to ensure that the society, the citizenry, is make it whole? The notion that the government of the United States will turn around in the middle of a pandemic and say, all right, the problem is the casinos, and we need to keep the airline industry straight. And, questions of, well, wait a minute, should we have a universal basic income so people are made whole, that they are intact during the time period where they may not be able to go to work? I mean, there are going to be a lot of cascading problems in our society associated with this, meaning even if you don't necessarily get ill, it doesn't mean you're not contaminated or that you can't contaminate somebody else. And depending on your type of job, if you have an Uber job, if you're working at, let's say, a restaurant, a cafeteria, if you're working at any of these organizations that may send people home, like you're going to see a cascading issue of failures, potentially evictions, and it doesn't necessarily seem the society has taken the steps necessary to deal with it. I mean, France, Emmanuel Macron, a banker, has come out with policies of like anti-eviction and legislation and those type of things in order to, again, make the society whole. And to make this point that much more onerous, Robert Reich, he put out a tweet. He said, Big Pharma got language in the coronavirus bill preventing the government from limiting their profits on any future vaccines, even though many of the same drug companies are receiving funding from the government to combat the pandemic. Now you get to see what matters more. And, this is kind of what I said in the monologue. If you want to get to this kind of root of a corruption or problem in your particular country, in your government, I suspect you look at the fault lines. This is one of the fault lines. In the middle of a pandemic, they were worried about profits over human lives. It's amazing.
And Paul, I guess going back there to what Jamarl is saying, this idea of searching for profits in the middle of a pandemic is also the basic motives for these corporations and government is to seek profit during peaceful times as well, and not addressing a lot of the issues. We talked a lot at length yesterday about the conditions at one of the senior public housing buildings here in Washington, D.C., and advice from CDC and others is to make sure you're doing a thorough cleaning of your property. But these properties, as we've mentioned, are in complete disrepair and rundown. The 8,000 some units in Washington, D.C. need nearly $2.2 billion of repair. So this idea of a thorough cleaning, it's not thoroughly being cleaned when we have plenty of resources and everyone's at their jobs. So now we're seeing these situations break down in kind of a crisis mode and show their compounded nature, Paul. I'm just curious of what else you're seeing, a system of failure, maybe around how food's being delivered or medicine is even able to get and reach some of these seniors in the buildings that you're working with.
Well, that's a great statement there too, Bob. The thing is, there's little to no attention that's being paid to the people that are on a fixed income, be it seniors, and like the gentleman said beforehand, we also have families on our property that don't work in a field where they can telework. They work at these service jobs at restaurants, fast food places, grocery stores, and when they close down, that means that they don't have an income at all, and they don't have the food for their families. And there's no one government out delivering any type of food. We're bailing the banks out, we're bailing the corporations out, we're giving millions and millions of dollars, but on the grassroots level in our inner cities, they're not receiving any type of support or very minimal support. And that's a big problem. Like when we talk about the corruption, we always talk about corruption as in these other countries, but our country is very corrupted, and we should look in the mirror, and when we go to our polls and we vote for these politicians, to vote for politicians that have helping people, not just in business. Because when we vote these business people into these offices, their number one support that they're going to provide to is to the businesses. And like Bob said, we're here. We're serving our residents. They're part of a lunch feeding program that's Monday through Friday. The company that's serving their food did not have a plan in place, and the plan that they came up with was not a very good plan. And when my organization stepped in to assist originally, they let us assist minimally, but the plan that they had still didn't work, and we ended up having to restructure the plan to make it more efficient. And we're not a government agency, and we have nowhere near the amount of resources as a government agency. It's mind-boggling that we have officials that's higher up of government agencies that does not have a plan that would directly help the people that need the help the most.
Yeah, and Paul, I guess I'm really curious. We just have about 30 seconds left with you here. I'm curious now if the government is saying, yes, we need to get money directly to people. We need to get money in people's pockets to be able to go out and pay for groceries or get the essential services. I can't even imagine how that would be done. You have a lot of people that are possibly undocumented. You have a lot of people that don't have credit cards or bank accounts. You have a lot of people that are still not paying attention to the current crisis moment and maybe don't have a full comprehension of what's taking place. Are they expecting people just to wait in lines at different municipal buildings to get this money? I mean, the mere distribution of welfare in America is completely broken. You'll see that with lines wrapped around blocks at certain points of the month. There's not an easy system to actually get money to those who need it. I'm not sure, Paul, if I can imagine a system. Maybe you can.
Well, Bob, what needs to happen is not just money, but we need to treat this as a national emergency like it is. And instead of money, we should have connection with these big corporations that sell food and deliver the food by the truckloads to these communities so they won't have to go to the stores, so they won't have to come out of their units too far. But the same way that we go into other countries and bring aid and packages and stuff in, we should do the same thing with our residents here in the United States. We pay taxes every day.
Yeah.
They go to the grocery stores. Even if they have the money, if they go to grocery stores, the stuff are not in the grocery stores. So the government should connect with these large corporations that sell food and bring the food directly to the community.
We'll see what that looks like over the next few days. That was Paul Jones. He's the Tenant Association president at Columbia Heights Village. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to turn to a quick break here on Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We've been talking about the coronavirus and, of course, the effects it's having across the economic, political, and social spheres. But guys, what if there was something scarier to worry about? I listened to the last guest and I thought, this sounds like Resident Evil, where they give you a vaccine and all of a sudden these guys become zombies. But what if there's something else, something a little bit larger? Give us a call at 202-521-1320 if you have anything to say on these topics or whatever else is on your mind. So we are joined by an amazing friend of the show. I've called him the most terrifying man alive, Guy McPherson, scientist and professor emeritus of natural resources and ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Arizona. So Guy's here to talk to us about something that's sneaking up on us to kill us while all of us are sick from COVID-19. Last week, Newsweek ran a story titled, "Unusual Uplift at Yellowstone Volcano was caused by magma rising deep beneath the surface. Study finds." Yellowstone, of course, basically is a super volcano. And when this story came out, all of Twitter went ballistic, screaming, "Not now, Yellowstone. We're already worried about the pandemic, and now we have magma to manage." The Newsweek story reported that in 2013, an era of the Yellowstone supervolcano started to rise at an unusually high rate, and over the next 2 years, rose nearly 6 inches per year, the highest rate of uplift ever recorded inside the caldera. Scientists ended up attributing the rate of ground deformation to magma intrusion deep below, which was pushing the rock upward. Now, magma intrusion sounds really both metal and really both scary, no pun intended, but the U.S. Geological Survey stepped in and said, look, there's nothing to worry about, fam. Everything is fine. Guy, welcome to the show. 1, I hope you're safe. 2, and like I said, I've called you the most terrifying man alive for telling us basically the reality of climate change and global warming. Should we have anything to panic here? Meaning, is a supervolcano going to erupt and effectively destroy half the world?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to chat today, Jamarl and Bob. And I don't think we have anything to worry about. Well, I mean, people are going to worry regardless. And there might be a little bit to worry about. The Yellowstone caldera is long overdue for a massive eruption. But that said, based on the evidence we've seen so far, and particularly based on a paper in the peer-reviewed Journal of Geological Research, Solid Earth, that came out this January, so just a couple of months ago, it seems that the magma beneath the caldera has subsided, or at the very least slowed its pushing up of the caldera from below. So it looks like it is paused for now. The observation that the magma was intruding up into the caldera starting in 2013, 2014, and then again in 2016, that was kind of a big deal, and it was a very rapid rate of change. But it looks like the caldera has settled down for now.
But has Yellowstone erupted before? I mean, the whole idea behind the supervolcano is when that thing erupts, I mean, it takes like pushes the world or something. Like it's obscenely powerful in regards to the eruption. Has that gone off before, and what were the consequences if it has?
Yes, it has gone off before, and it will undoubtedly go off again, and the consequences will be extreme. I remember reading an article many years ago about the first person who identified the boundary of the caldera. So he was looking at maps and wandering around on the ground, and he couldn't quite figure out where the caldera was. And finally, he took a big satellite view that showed an enormous area, and his response was, "Whoa, I had no idea it was that big. It's just huge." And so what he was looking for was a typical sort of medium-sized Pinatubo-style volcano, and what he found was the caldera includes the entirety of Yellowstone National Park and then some. So it's this enormous caldera.
Whoa! Did you say the caldera is the entirety of Yellowstone National Park?
Yes, it is.
Wow!
And the geologist who was looking for it was blown away because he thought he was looking for a cinder cone here and there, right? And instead, it turns out to be an enormous caldera that has the potential to literally shake the world and cover us with ash and cloud the sky for days and so on. I mean, even Pinatubo, when it went off, was a big deal, but it's nothing compared to what we're facing with the Yellowstone caldera.
Wow, that's terrifying in an odd way. I mean, when is the next expectation for this to go off? I mean, look, this is kind of one of those things where people say, at some point the world is going to end. At some point, you're going to have the sun that just gets so expansive as it starts burning down its minerals, or as it starts burning down its elements that it expands all the way out to the Earth and sucks up the whole solar system. But I would imagine that this volcano is expected to go off before billions of years. Like, so what is the expectation in regards to this going off at some point if we don't necessarily have to worry about the apocalypse tomorrow?
Well, as with any of these large-scale events, we're talking about geological timescales. So the fact that it's gone off at a certain periodicity in the past, we can use that as an indicator of how soon it might be expected to go off. But as we've talked before, Jamarl, we're in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change, and that, to me, represents a far greater threat than the Yellowstone caldera. Could it go off at any time? Sure. Would it have enormous consequences? Yes, absolutely. It would cool the Earth very profoundly and very quickly, and there would be no opportunity for humans or other organisms to adapt. But that said, it doesn't seem to me that it's likely to go off literally any moment. And this is sort of an example of the way I've been living for the last 15 years or so. Living with urgency, recognizing that, as Homer pointed out in the Iliad some 2,800 years ago, any moment might be my last, but also recognizing that any moment is almost certainly not going to be my last. So how do you live with those two things in mind? Well, it can be a little exhausting. It encourages people to chase after their dreams and to do the things that they really want to do, recognizing that our time is short. But on the other hand, you don't want to take that too far, because then you stop flossing your teeth and you stop brushing your teeth and you stop taking care of yourself, So, I don't want to take my message as, oh my God, we're going to die tomorrow, so that means I can party like it's 1999. That's not the point at all. The point is to try to complete relationships in your life, treat every goodbye as if it's your last with that individual or those people, and live with urgency, do the things that you feel like you must do, particularly with respect to the relationships in your life. Let's start living as if we're in planetary hospice, as if the situation calls for radical honesty, as if the situation calls for completing relationships, because we never know when this is up. That said, do I think the Yellowstone caldera is going to go off tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, or within the next 5 years? No, I don't think so.
I'm glad you said that, because, that's true always. Like, even if we found out that the world was going to end in 10 years, it's very possible that you could drop dead tomorrow. There's no situation where we were ever going to make it out alive. We were always going to be, no one gets out of life alive in real terms. And so it's like your time is always limited, even though we like to ignore that and we like to kind of push that away like that's not necessarily true. Whether we're talking about the caldera, whether we're talking about the, climate or anything else, I entirely agree with you that, basically you live your life pushing for the things that matter the most, because tomorrow could be your last, and that could be across the board with pretty much any of us. Absolutely agree with you, Guy.
Well, Jamarl, we are still alive, and we're going to do another hour of radio here on Radio Sputnik. People are listening to Political Misfits. That was Guy McPherson, a scientist and professor emeritus at the University of Arizona. Guy, thank you so much for joining us. Well, with that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk about mini Super Tuesday here on Political Misfits. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back after this, so stay with us.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's keep going against the rain. We have lots to cover this hour. As always, your calls and tweets are appreciated. You can reach us at 202-521-1320 to discuss whatever is on your mind. Elections are holidays. Let's see. Something is a little rooty here. There we are. So elections are holidays here, and despite being in the midst of a pandemic, kind of Super Tuesday is no different. It does feel different, though. Arizona, Florida, Illinois, and Ohio are expected to vote today. The states formally shut down restaurants, schools, and large gatherings. Combine this with the Center for Disease Control warning against gatherings larger than 50 people. A question has to be raised by the public and health officials, or a question has been raised by the public and health officials on whether postponing the election would be in the best interest of the general public. Friday, Georgia and Louisiana were the first two states to postpone their primaries. Louisiana was the first, pushed theirs from April 4th to June 20th, with Georgia following the next day, pushing theirs from March 24th to May 19th. Kentucky follows suit, pushing their May primary to June. But what about today? The states that vote today, including the elderly Mecca, Florida, not so much. There is a controversy around Ohio, whether or not that one will go forward. Initially, the governor wanted to stop the election, or at the very least push it back. The judge denied his request, but there is news and reporting out that the elections are still going to be halted. There's a question mark around it. But the other elections in Arizona, Florida, Illinois will be going forward as planned. So to discuss, we're joined with friend of the show, Eleanor Goldfield. Eleanor is a creative frontline activist and journalist focused on radical censored issues via photo, video, and written word and other media. She co-hosts the podcast Common Censored along with Lee Camp. Eleanor, how are you today?
I'm still alive, just like you guys. Quarantine.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. That's absolutely good to hear. I don't want any harm to come to you. I hope you're keeping safe. And speaking about keeping safe, so Tom Perez is on Chris Hayes. Now, Chris Hayes is asking Tom Perez, why is the DNC keeping open the elections and whether or not they should do something else? I mean, they could have mail-in ballots. They knew the coronavirus was coming up. And do you really want all of these people to meet at these election sites when there's a potential pandemic and many of these states have been shutting down? So let's hear Tom Perez questioned by Chris Hayes on whether he should keep this election going in the midst of a pandemic.
Is your view that this can be safely conducted tomorrow? Who have you been consulting to come to that view?
Well, again, we didn't intervene in that case.
No, I know. This is a state matter, but I'm asking your position as Tom Perez, the head of DNC. Sure. My understanding is you're saying you agree with the states that are going forward.
Yes, we respect what they're doing, and we always encourage everyone. And I was in contact today with people in a number of these states, including but not limited to Arizona, and again asking them if they believe they have the systems in place that enable them to put the elections on tomorrow, and they do. And Republican and Democratic governors have made that judgment that they can do that. I don't think it's for me to second guess those judgments, Chris, and so. I respect that. And again, the point I'm making is there's a broader issue here. And that broader issue is we ought to make it easier for people to vote.
Yes, we should make it easier for people to vote. But that's a secondary question of whether in the middle of a pandemic, we should have people going into these petri dishes. So, Eleanor, what do you think about this? Should they postpone these elections? Should they have had a little bit more forethought in regards to going about trying to find other means and ways for people to vote as opposed to kind of meeting up at these locations? And does Tom Perez himself, being head of the DNC, have a responsibility to make that choice and make that decision in the way that he seems to be pushing the responsibility off to the various states?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always convenient. Excuse me, that was just a piece of hair. I'm not sick. It's always convenient to the Republicans to say things like, oh, well, we respect the decisions of the states. You know, you hear Republicans talk about this all the time, states' rights, but then they turn around and say, oh, you can't make your own decisions about clean water or clean air policy. And this is the same thing with the Democrats. The Democrats could easily say, you know what, we're going to hold off on this, and now is the ideal time to talk about universal health care. So we're going to make it easier for people to vote from home. We're going to create an open source online voting system that people can have access to the code so they can see what we're doing. And at the same time, we're going to get to work on making sure that everybody has health care and access to care well beyond the end of this pandemic. That would be what a part of do, but it's what the Democrats always do. They talk about these things like, oh, we respect that, and you know, we're for this and that, but when push comes to shove, they're not. And with regards to voting, I think they're glad to keep voting open. And because they want people to vote, because they want people to vote in this situation, because a lot of people that would vote for Bernie are not going to go out to polling places. And to be honest, more people would be voting for Bernie than for Biden. So I think the Dems are just happy to let this go forward. See voter turnout drop to even more ridiculous, absurd, low numbers, and then try to turn around and blame it on Bernie for being in the race when there's a global pandemic and twisting this into something that they can use.
Well,
why do you not see the other? I don't know. I don't know why you don't see it. I guess I'm interested, Jamarl, because it's one thing I just don't want to talk about because it all just feels so like politicizing COVID-19. But if my initial reaction,
it's a political show.
That's fair. Okay. If my initial reaction was to say who's going to be hurt, wouldn't it be seniors staying at home that are the vulnerable populations? And if we see overwhelmingly, if Joe Biden supporters are older, I would think of somewhere like Arizona that would maybe actually play to Sanders' side, but maybe I guess I'm curious where you fall there on this analysis.
Florida also, Bob. I mean, I agree with you. I was thinking the exact same thing. I would think that if you're older, you may think to yourself, I don't want to die to put Biden in, especially if Biden is going to win anyway, and make that choice of like, yeah, maybe I don't show up. Like, so I'm curious, do you think that it's going to cut down on the voting tally? And if it does cut down on the voting tally, wouldn't the younger demographic be more inclined to say, well, this is a boomer killer. I'm not a boomer, so I'm going to vote for my guy. Or do you think it would end up being just depressing the vote where older people still show up to vote for Biden?
Yeah, I think Eleanor, I would be curious for her to expound on her point. I think the other thing is that the Democratic Party, the quote unquote establishment, they know exactly where their voters are, and they have a very centralized turnout machine. If Sanders and his team are looking for kind of more sporadic, more organic, more people are really energized because he was able to do a rally there the other day and inspire them. Sanders' rallies are much different than Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders' rally has the Cornel West, they have the Ilhan Omar, they have music groups, they have this energy that then ripples across society. He's not able to do that right now. He's stuck on doing advertisements, and an ad for Biden and an ad for Sanders right now is almost a wash, especially now if you consider Biden's super PACs jumping in and putting a ton of advertisement out there. Maybe on some of the mechanisms that would need to take place for Sanders to turn out people aren't going to be there. So I can see it in both lenses and potential. So I'm curious what Eleanor has to say to that.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I mean, those are excellent points, but I think that we are talking about these primaries as if they're legit, and they're not. The votes are being stolen left and right, so the Dems know that regardless of what happens, their candidate is going to come out on top. You know, you only have to look at exit polls that have been put out by TDMS research that show that there's extreme discrepancies between the exit polls and what actually shows up thanks to these black box voting machines. So I think that's the first thing. We shouldn't talk about these primaries like, oh, people go vote, and then that equals what the results are, because it's not. And second of all, I think that people are, where it's available, people have been doing mail-in voting, and older folks do take advantage of mail-in voting as well. So I think that's the other thing. Yes, older people do tend to vote more than younger people, but I also think because everybody is being told to stay home, I think across the board you're also seeing people staying at home more. So the Democrats, I think, are so arrogant and so sure that they're going to come out on top that even if more older people are the ones that show up at the polls, they don't care. They know that they're going to come out on top. Even if older people are the ones staying home, they know that they're going to come out on top at the end of this, regardless, because of the rigging that they're doing.
Eleanor, what do you say to the people who say that the TDMS? I've seen the information about the TDMS, basically the wide disparities between the exit polls versus the actual results. And I get the weirdness of it. Somebody goes in, they make their vote, they walk out, and then for whatever reason, they don't match up. And they don't match up by like 10, 20 points. I've seen research, though, that kind of push back on that analysis. What do you say to people who kind of make the point that an exit total is not exactly the same thing as the actual vote total, and that basically TDMS is like one of the only places where people are seeing that argument being made, and it's not necessarily a direct one-to-one?
I'd say that look at what happened in 2016, and exit polls have been done globe, and they've been done for decades. And people have trusted them and said, look, this matches, that means that it's legit. These people aren't just like, willy-nilly coming up with these numbers. These are experts. These are statisticians that are coming up with these and comparing the exit poll results to the actual vote tally. So this is not, I think people have a misunderstanding of what exit polls are and think that it's just kind of like this random willy-nilly of whatever, let's just throw a number up there. But it's not. And it's used quite steadfastly until 2016, when exit poll gate happened, which was basically when results started coming in showing that Clinton was winning way beyond what the exit polls showed that she was winning, and in fact winning when she should have been losing. So what the Dems did and the corporate media did was said, look, we're not using exit polls anymore, because what they
California
is that they were trying to change the exit polls to match the computer results. But that's not how it works. The exit polls show what the computer results should be, and so those were vehemently not matching. So the Democratic Party and corporate media basically just said, you know what, we're going to stop showing you the exit polls. We're going to stop using exit polls. And now you have to go to people like TDMS Research to even find exit polls, because what used to be on CNN and MSNBC is just not there anymore, because they know that they're rigging it and they're stealing it, so they don't want to show you that so overtly anymore.
Also, it's to be clear, the Republican Party don't have any issue with this, meaning the disparities seem to be only on the Democrat side, not on the Republican side, right?
Yep, exactly. The Republicans have their own. I definitely don't want to make it sound like the Republicans don't rig things either. They're in charge of interstate cross-check, which is basically the system that knocks predominantly Black and Brown and Latinx voters off the voter rolls arbitrarily.
No, I just mean in the primaries. Like in the primaries of 2020, the disparities seem to be showing up in the Democratic side, not the Republican side.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Well, let's get a caller in here who has been waiting to talk. I believe Zane is on the line, had some comments around Joe Biden. Zane, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you for calling in. What's on your mind today?
I just wanted to talk about, just with the prospect of the pandemic, how it seems like before this, I gave Biden a really small chance of winning. But looking at the situation now, I think Biden could actually win at this point. Just because, the economy was the only thing that Trump, the only positive thing he could actually say while he was president. And it seems like right now we're headed towards at least a recession, it seems like, if things keep going the way they're going. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this.
Thanks for
watching the press conference.
Yeah, thank you for the call, Zane.
Okay.
Yeah, greatly appreciated there. I'll turn that to Eleanor Goldfield. Eleanor, I am kind of curious here. Americans have a short memory. If Donald Trump in the United States is able to get through this current moment here in the next matter of months, if the government is able to tighten down and try to slow the infection rate, I could see it on one end being spun by the Trump administration as saying, look, the challenge came to our door, it was here, and we drove it out, and they'll do everything they can to make the stock market look like it's doing well. There's plenty of ways for them to bolster the economy. So in many ways, I could see this in the long run, if Trump is able to get through it, basically say, look, I was the one that saved the day. On the other end of things, obviously, we know that's not true. It never needed to get to the point that we are in now. This was completely avoidable. There was plenty of things that the U.S. government could have prepared for over the last decade, if not more, for this moment. The stock market has taken huge hits, and it may not be able to recover anywhere near the levels that Donald Trump would like to see it heading towards November. I'm curious how you're seeing things right now in this current moment. Is Donald Trump hurt by this, or is it continue to basically play blue and red politics, and people who were on his side the day before are going to be on his side the day after?
I definitely think it's hurting him. And, I mean, he said as much. Yeah, he gave a speech and admitted that the stock market wasn't doing well, and finally admitted that coronavirus was bad, very bad. So I think it does hurt him, but the question is, does it hurt him enough to get Joe Biden elected? And I do agree with Zane here that in times like these, people act out of fear, right? And I think that get back to some kind of normalcy, which is wrong, and it's normalcy means like the Obama era, when you had somebody that could, talk eloquently, and I'm not saying Biden can talk even, period, but when you had some people around Biden, that can talk eloquently about what we're going through and throw flowers on people's graves and things like that, as opposed to, the bull in the china shop, which is Trump. And so I think that if they can keep Biden quiet enough, which they're doing now because, no public speeches, yay. If they can keep Biden quiet enough so that he doesn't say horrific things or start fights with like union workers for no reason, then I think that Biden does have a chance. And that's why, myself included, folks on the left are continuing to organize and demand that people basically sign on to say never Biden, because we're at a crossroads here, and there are two directions that we can go. We can either see how things are progressing with the fall of the economy and then go try to find our way back to this sort of disaster capitalism, or we can say, hey, this is the ideal time. When people are acting socialist in a crisis like this, you have evictions shutting down, cops are arresting fewer people. We can either take a hold of that and say, look, this is how it should be all of the time, and we refuse to hand it over to the Democrats to destroy that. This is our time to either create a new party, to find folks that are like-minded in the Democratic Party, to split, however that plays out. But this is a time for folks on the left to really mobilize and organize around these times of mutual aid and say we can do better, we will do better, and it's never Biden and it's never Trump.
Eleanor, God, you have no idea how much it thrills me to hear you say that. I mean, because that was basically my argument in 2016, and it seems to be a lot more people have come around to that way of thinking. Basically, how do you get the policy concessions that you want, be it Medicare for all, Social Security, expansion, or getting rid of student debt? How do you get all of these policy priorities that the Democratic Party in general agrees with, just meaning regular people agree with, but that the Democratic Party has lined up almost entirely against? Meaning they've called you a Russian plant, they've called you and compared you to Nazis, they've called you bros, racist, sexist, all of that stuff, and have been absolutely diametrically against your policies. And it's like, how do you get what you want politically if you're willing to just acquiesce to anything that they give you? You know what I mean? That's why I love that you said that. I mean, basically, do you believe that the left has been its own worst enemy in regards to the way it's acted in the last, 40 years, where it used cowardice as opposed to actually really pushing and holding political leaders accountable?
Well, I think you could say that that's a general populist problem, not just a left. You see poor whites in the South, well, not just in the South, but that's where I'm from. So, but you see them voting against their own interests constantly, too. So this is a problem, but I wouldn't lay all the blame at their feet. I think it's important that we recognize that brainwashing and propagandizing has been going on for a very long time, basically since the founding of this country, because let's be honest, it's never been a democracy. It's founded on genocide and slavery. So I think that we have to be compassionate and empathizing when we talk about this. People have been tricked and shamed and in many ways forced into voting against their interests because of this really one party with two sides, this one party party system that is beholden to Wall Street and destructive and oppressive industries. But yeah, I think that absolutely people have been lacking in the political power to hold these leaders accountable, and they've just continued to take and take and take and take. And I think that right now, that's why this is such a powerful intersection in time, because you have basically like the rise of more overt fascism in this country, and then an example of what, and Bernie's not radical, an example of what kind of America circa 1950s, in terms of at least like economic policy, looked like. And we have a choice between that, and we have the power to say, look, this isn't about Bernie, this is about progress, and this is about saying no to fascism, and this is about saying yes to the people. You know, if you don't like Bernie, fine, but we are in this together, we the people, and we, not just on the left, but wherever you lay on that political spectrum, let's like step outside of theory and talk about what we need in order to survive, in order to thrive. And this is that powerful moment when we see what we need to survive, right? We need medical care. We need sick leave. We need the ability to stay in our homes so that we're not evicted and homeless. We need these things, and we're recognizing that. So it's a very powerful time for organizers to take hold of that and make this a jumping off point for mass movement that basically looks at the Democrats and the Republicans and says, look, you are part of the past, we are the future, and we're moving forward.
I totally agree.
I totally agree as well. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now because of this kind of crisis point is the work that needs to be done to organize exactly what you're saying, Eleanor. It's one thing to call for a revolution. It's another thing to actually organize one. And for people right now, we're seeing, at least here in Washington, D.C., that there are a lot of people that want that alternative worldview that you're offering. But in this moment right now, people are rushing to create Google Docs and Google groups and different Facebook groups. I mean, basically, people are trying to create new distribution of resource systems, and that takes a lot of work. The Democratic Party is where these social movements go to die, or the Republican Party, or electoral politics in America. But it shows that people are going to need to organize this alternative themselves. And I think going into this crisis, people, again, aren't doing that unless they have kind of a fire under their butt to get them to go out and do that. And so as much as we need this thing, it's showing right now in this moment how broken the system is, but the lift that will have to be done to offer anything else, for me, is a little bit overwhelming in the moment, but it's great to see so many different people are indeed working on it, Jamarl.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, pivoting just a bit, I want to get into a story that came out about Russiagate, or let's say the continued embarrassment that is Russiagate. Better yet, even more appropriately, the continuing collapse, but never completely collapsed, Russiagate conspiracy. So in 2018, St. Robert Mueller III, got to add the third, the second one is a different person, secured indictments against Concord Management and Concord Consulting, in addition to 13 Russians and another company called Internet Research Agency, accusing them of operating a scheme on using Facebook and Twitter ads, the majority of which took place after the election, to spread disinformation and exploit America's social divisions. Now, personally, I strongly suspected that Mueller charged these people believing that no one would ever come back to challenge the charges. And prosecutors in this case ended up being wrong. Concord ended up fighting the charges in court and started using the legal protections in order to get discovery to figure out what the government was doing in order to effectively pursue this particular investigation. So on Monday, the Justice Department moved to drop the charges under national security concerns, weighing the benefits of securing a guilty verdict against the companies which can't be meaningfully punished in the United States against exposing national security secrets. Now, Eleanor, like I said early on, for years, I've made the point that I don't buy the Russia stuff. It is very possible that the company that they're talking about was just a troll farm that, just like any other capitalistic endeavor that's trying to maximize profit during an election, it was using the election as their linchpin, their thing to hook into getting people to click on those ads. And again, the overwhelming majority took place after the election. So the federal government is trying to say that, look, no, this is not a situation where we have a weak case. We are really just dropping these charges because we don't want to disclose any information for national security. Eleanor, did they believe that the opposition wasn't going to ask for discovery? Or do you think I'm right on this, that ultimately Mueller never believed that they were going to bring these charges, and the prosecutors were shocked and didn't necessarily know what to do when the company came to contest the charges?
Well, I certainly can't speak to what's going on in Mueller's mind. That's anyone's guess, including Mueller's, I think. But I mean, up in the courtroom, there was definitely. I mean, they asked for a delay, and the judge was like, "Well, they're here now." So, because they didn't expected anybody to show up to be like, "Yeah, okay, bring it. What do you got?" And I think that just shows. And also, I just want to point out, they're doing this now. Like when everybody's out buying toilet paper and Purell, or trying to, they bring this up because no one's going to notice. You know, there was an article in The Hill, but it's not like CNN is going to stop their pandemic freakouts to talk about, oh, and by the way, do you remember Russiagate, that thing that we totally crashed and burned on? That's just been...
Yeah, this is going to get buried. This is totally going to get buried.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is why they do it. You know, it's like passing legislation that cuts down your pension on like New Year's Day or something. They do this on purpose because they don't want people to know about it and they don't want to respond. And of course, this is just further evidence to show that the whole Russiagate thing was, I mean, and we'll probably see it again here. It's a way to deflect blame when they chose the least popular candidate in the history of the Democrats to go up against a neo-fascist, and they lost, and they refused to take responsibility for that or any of the election rigging that they took part in. And you know, here again in 2020, I can't wait to see what they've got in store for us when they literally prop up Biden, the second least popular candidate in history, and potentially lose again.
I'm curious, if Biden loses this race, I mean, Hillary Clinton lost to reality show hosts, and after them putting up another right-wing Democrat, if he loses again, do you think there's any structural change, or do you think there's any change or fundamental change that takes place within the context of the party after a second major loss with their establishment candidate?
Not at all, because they've already started talking about who they can blame. They've already brought Russia in. You know, they've already been raking Bernie over the coals for just existing, which they did last time as well. I think that, you know, the Democrats exist on this inability to be self-aware, because if they were, then they'd recognize that this is all of their fault. And this supposed party of the people is really just another flavor of corporate party. So, no, I don't think that there's going to be any structural changes. They'll continue to try and silence any progressive candidates that they have in the party, try to keep them out like they have with Bernie and, of course, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, perhaps most glaringly. There's not going to be any eureka moment for them, which is why, you know, again, this is a prime moment to really say, look, the Democrats are dying of their own hand, and we don't want to go down with that ship.
I absolutely agree with you. Full stop. Absolutely agree. I mean, and that's the biggest concern. I mean, in my head, to get anything accomplished, there's this combination between movements, but also a party that's available to kind of work with those movements. And I have to be honest, I don't see anything that looks like the party is trying to work with anything other than just to get itself elected. They asked Joe Biden, hey, Joe Biden, what are you going to do for Bernie voters? Joe Biden's response was, I'm going to get Bernie Sanders to try to get his voters to vote me in. Like, I don't know how that wins. Like,
but Jamarl, I mean, no, Jamarl, and absolutely not. I think we've talked about this on the show before. I mean, you really need to emphasize the party part of Democratic Party. It's not Democratic organizing machine. It's not Democratic go fight for the people on the streets machine. It's not Democratic we want a better living standard for the people of America. It's a Democratic Party. This party cares about galas. They care about soirees and happy hours. They care about it's a brand. People aren't going to the Democratic Party to say, this is the hub of where I'm going to write policy. This is the hub of where we're going to end homelessness for Americans. This is the hub where we're going to do emergency preparedness or figure out healthcare for people. These people are branded. They go and hang out at events. We saw that at every one of these Democratic National Committee, events or fundraisers. Basically, these debates have not been a debate of policies and ideas. This is where they partner with big media to make a ton of money off of these shows. It's a show. It's theatrics. It has nothing to do with actually what it means to be a political party like it does in other countries. This is where people basically gather, wear tuxedos and nice fancy events. I can promise you over the last week, I've been invited to, not the last week, the last month, I guess, before COVID-19, to more happy hours with Democratic Party officials than I've been invited to organizing events. And it's down to the grassroots, it's the organizers. It's so many of the people that would basically hold their nose and vote for a Democratic nominee, that being Bernie Sanders, as opposed to necessarily people that are like going to ride for Bernie Sanders. These people are like basically people that would support Sanders are only coming to the party because he's running. And I think you made that very clear at the top of the hour. These people aren't looking for Bernie Sanders to go in and reform the Democratic Party. They're looking for somebody to be able to gain power and take away the resources from that party and change it all together. And that's what was so fearful, I think, for so many longtime Democratic elected officials.
Eleanor?
Yeah, sorry, I agree.
Yeah, it was my rant, I guess. I mean, at this point, I don't think there's anything else to be said. I mean, this party has been a dying party for decades, and the three of us right here are almost preaching to the choir. And these people are going to go down with the Titanic before they ever try to get into a lifeboat offered by Bernie Sanders. I mean, these people would go down with a huge sinking ship before they got on a boat with Bernie Sanders. Well, with that, a big thanks to Eleanor Goldfield for joining us. We'll take another break here on Political Misfits. We're live in Washington, D.C., and we'll be back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Well, welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. That music, yes, it is Tuesday. It is 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the nation's capital. It is time for our weekly politics and art segment. Jamarl, you do know there, before the quarantine started and the shutdown of theaters and bars and everything else here in Washington, D.C., I had the chance to catch the world premiere of Celia and Fidel here at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. The play was fantastic. Dive into the relationship between Fidel Castro and his most trusted confidant and political partner, Celia Sanchez, as well as the relationship or lack thereof between the United States and Cuba. Here to talk about the play is playwright Eduardo Machado. Eduardo, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you today?
Good.
Hey, your play for me highlighted so much of my own miseducation I had received throughout my lifetime regarding Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and the Cuban people. And I thought you did a great job of being both critical of Cuba as well as highlighting the success of Cubans fighting for liberation and the complex history of the United States and Cuba. this obviously is not an easy thing to do with American audiences. Many Americans, like my past self, only thought of Cuba as the enemy, the outcast, or the bad, and we were told that they aren't interesting. And because of so often hearing about Cuba in a positive light would actually get you in trouble in many circles here in the United States, many people simply just took the official line: Cuba is an enemy, Cuba has an embargo imposed on the United States for rightful reasons. And because, like I said there, if you spoke up for Cuba or try to point out any of the good that the country may have done, you would often be slapped in the wrist. Let me play a quick clip here from a Democratic debate last month where Bernie Sanders had this exact problem. He had to go on the defense after he did the radical thing, Eduardo, of highlighting Cuba's literacy rate as well as medical advancements. Let's play that clip here with Bernie Sanders.
Excuse me. Occasionally, it might be a good idea to be honest about American foreign policy, and that includes the fact that America has overthrown governments all over the world, in Chile, in Guatemala, in Iran, and when dictatorships, whether it is the Chinese or the Cubans, do something good, you acknowledge that. But you don't have trade love letters with them.
So, Eduardo, a dictatorship, but is doing good things, is kind of the best you can do here in American politics when it comes to talking about Cuba. I'm curious first, why did you write this play, and how did you weigh the complex history Americans have with Cuba?
Well, I'm Cuban, and I've written a lot of plays about Cuba, all controversial because they don't take a side, I think, including this play. And Fidel was the only person I hadn't really tackled, and Molly Smith at Arena approached me that she wanted to commission a play for the Power Plays about Fidel, because she knew I was interested in writing one. And I said yes, and she gave me 1950 or 1980, that decade, and I decided in 1980 because I know that Carter had tried to end the embargo, and Fidel had the Mariel boatlift happen in such a chaotic way, so Carter would not be able to end the embargo. And I wanted to find out why he did that, and so I wrote the play. Because it's a very complicated subject, as you have said. And it's also, you know, Cuba has been the center of America's desires since Teddy Roosevelt. And the way that Cuba was portrayed in the press before the Spanish-American War, which, by the way, was a war that went on for 35 years before the Americans landed, and the Maine was bombed, was as a white woman that was about to be raped by the natives. And the only people that could save her was America. And I think they still feel the same way. And I wanted to write about it. And we stood up for ourselves in the 50s. They wanted us to stand up for ourselves because the mob was becoming too rich in Cuba and posing a problem in the United States. And once we did, they were against Fidel and made him turn to the Soviets, which he might or might not have done. I don't know. And all of a sudden, we became the place where no one could go to. You can go to Vietnam. You can go to China. Well, not right now. You can't go to Cuba. Hold on one second. Anyway.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, we can't go anywhere right now at this point. But, you know, I absolutely hear you that Cuba is still obviously so close, but yet so far away. And I thought what you did so brilliantly in the play was talking about how relationships are layered, how you were able to show those who are close to us. We have an ability to trust people so deeply, yet at the same time distrust them. We have the ability to love people so much, and yet at the same time hate them, swear loyalty in one moment and disavow them at another, that we can hold all of these truths at the same time. And I thought you showed that reality so well, both between the interpersonal relationships you laid out in the play, but also in the broader relationships around the play, such as the Cuban people's relationship with Fidel Castro. How do you layer, how did your play, I guess for me, just to praise you, I guess, and I'm not sure what the question is, but I thought that's what you explored so well, is the complexity of relationships, and that the United States relationship with Cuba is much more complex and diversified than what I think most people understand.
Because Fidel ended up being a dictator, and his ego got in his way. He started oppressing from the beginning people and making them leave. You know, I do think a lot of people left Cuba for two reasons at the beginning. He nationalized the bank. You got 698 pesos, no matter how much money you had in the bank. He took over companies, like my grandfather's bus company. He took that over 6 months after he was in power. And then he started having fake trials and shooting people on TV. And I think for a lot of people who had lived through Batista doing that, they couldn't believe that's what Fidel was also doing. And at the same time, for many, many people in Cuba, I've gone to Cuba a lot, he was their father. And they believed in him. And for many people who were poor, he gave them a future. So the contradiction has to be almost in every line to write a fair play about Fidel. And that's what I thought my job was. And also, I think for Celia, I got to express what I wish it would have been. You know, she's a ghost of the play. So she gets to talk frankly to him, the way I would have liked to have talked to him if I would have ever met him, you know, when I was older.
Yeah, and Jamarl, I'm curious, Jamarl, you didn't get a chance to see the play. Hopefully the play does reopen and gets its chance to shine as it is due. But Jamarl, we've talked a lot over the last month about how Bernie Sanders should talk in regards to the American people about the truths of the American foreign policy around the world, not only in Cuba, but towards China, all of Latin America, I guess all of Africa, basically of the whole entire world as this imperialist nation continues to run amok. And it's what I thought Eduardo did well in the play was offer those complexities kind of back and forth. And it's hard, though, in a political sphere to offer much nuance where you almost have to pick a side and you basically have to say, this is right, this is wrong. And Sanders, in many ways, I think has exhausted himself not being able to properly kind of find that path. Here's from you, Jamarl. What do you want people to know about Cuba? Or if you were advising Sanders and others, how do they communicate that complicated history, but yet at the same time, make sure that we are learning best practices from other nations?
Well, one of the things that I love in that clip that you played where Sanders was basically like, look, we got to be honest about American foreign policy. And I think you start there. And that's not something that our media does. That's not something that is even all that easy to do politically, because you're also right. They tend to be, okay, this is good, this is bad. In reality, the good and bad thing doesn't really exist. What happened exists. How you define it as being good, bad, or somewhere in between are personal colorings that you're adding on to it. Meaning that you can take an honest assessment and say that this place was a dictatorship where they were shooting people on television, but at the same token, their healthcare, their education was pretty excellent. Like you can do both of those things, especially if both of those things just so happen to sit side by side together, as just so happen to be true. And, you know, our foreign policy, when we're looking at other countries, especially like the banana republics, when we're talking about like Guatemala or Bolivia or Honduras, these countries where we either knocked over or put in dictators, like it's pretty rich that there's some dictators that we like and other dictators that we don't necessarily like. But that's, again, that gets into the complexity of American foreign policy and the way that we don't necessarily engage it honestly. Personally, that answer for me, for Sanders, was on point. And, you know, this was a play that I was supposed to see, I wanted to see, but again, it was during the Corona thing. It sounds like you did a great job in trying to meld those two things together in the sense of saying, look, my job here is not to judge. My job is to give somewhat of a better appraisal of the reality of this, not necessarily to take a side in regards to how this went. And it comes across, just based on this conversation, that you were able to pull that off pretty nicely. I'm curious, did you get pressure on this? Meaning when the American audiences watch this, your play may be the first time where they're getting a look in something with a little bit more complexity in regards to an explanation of the story. How has audiences received this play?
They seem to love it. There's some that leave, I think, because of the things I say about Nixon. They get a little upset. I want to say about Nixon.
Wait, what did they get upset about Nixon?
Said that he was a wife beater and a money launderer with Bebe Rebozo in Miami, who was a Cuban money launderer, gangster, banker, that he was his closest friend, and they lived next door to each other in Key Biscayne, and they had a secret door between their two houses, and it's how the Republican Party became tropicalized and started working for the Cubans, which we all know. Because we all know the Iran-Contra thing was all because the Cubans in Miami forced Reagan into doing what he did. That's a part of American history that Americans...
Wait. I have never heard that. So you're saying that the Cubans had control of the U.S. government and that they forced Reagan into the Iran-Contra affair? Ronald Reagan wanted to invade South America on more than one occasion. I mean, in fact, Congress had went through to push through the Bolin Act to force Reagan to not do that. But you're saying that this has something to do with him being under the thumb of Cubans?
Broke into Watergate, and also highly recommend that everyone reads Joan Didion's Miami, which is what it's about, a book that was in 1986. It will explain it all. Okay. She coined the term the tropicalization of the Republican Party and why we're going to turn into a banana republic. And she was right. So yes, that's what that book's about. And I highly recommend you all read it. Because this is part of American history, which is, yes, years you had democracy for yourselves, not anyone else. And in Latin America, who you wanted to go after the most for some reason was Fidel Castro. Now, Fidel Castro on his side wanted you away because that's the only way he could remain in power forever. And the smartest thing anyone did was when Obama started opening it up. I was there because I was going to do a TV show in Havana, and we went there every month. The country was changing. I went back. No, they want your kind of democracy? I don't think so. I think they want some kind of socialism. But they could have it. And the country was changing. I went there a month ago, and it was back to oppressing the people because they're scared of you, and back to no economic future, which it seems like none of us have an economic future at this moment anyway. You know.
I'm curious also with the no economic future thing. I mean, basically, you're saying that, and this is, I absolutely agree with you, that the policy of the United States, often we drop the context of us, meaning we drop the fact that we're acting in the world and that people are responding to us. And when Obama was able to kind of pull back on attacking the country, that he couldn't keep control of the reins anymore. Like, meaning you can create a justifiable excuse that we must have a repressive country because we're under attack. All governments do it. Any government that's under attack gets more repressive. We did the same thing in World War I. We did the same thing in World War II. So that's not necessarily shocking. But I think your point is, look, our policies have effectively helped Castro stay in power for all of those decades because we've been keeping that embargo, not to mention we're trying to off him for all of those years. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, you are. That's what I believe. That's what a lot of my plays are about. I wrote a play called Havana's Waiting that's about that, and a play called The Cook that's about that. When I went back to Cuba in 1999, I realized that that's what was really going on. You know, when I got to Cuba the day Elian Gonzalez got to Miami. For my movie was at the festival there. You know who was at the hotel with me having drinks? Ethel Kennedy and Mariel Hemingway. That's the part.
Interesting. No way.
That's the part that people don't know. And who went there every year? Arnold, to buy cigars. And he was the governor of California. He went there every year. So there's a secret part that nobody knows. And unless you go there. And a lot of Americans went there when Obama opened it up. And there's also, Cuba is not the Eastern Bloc, you know. It was also, in many ways, brutal and in many ways, humanitarian revolution. Both things at once. You have to.
It was a bit of both. There's a book by Seymour Hersh called, I think it's called The Dark Side of Camelot. And in the book, Seymour Hersh makes this argument basically that in trying to kill Castro, that this incentivized Castro to get assistance from the Soviet Union, which effectively kicked off the Cuban Missile Crisis, meaning that even though people loved John F. Kennedy, ultimately John F. Kennedy's behavior was one of the things that effectively pushed and incentivizes the creation of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because Castro, after trying to be offed by the CIA for all of these years, goes to get assistance, which gets missiles put into Cuba in order to push back from the United States invading the country. Am I explaining that right? I mean, like, this kind of gets to this whole point about American foreign policy and the weirdness with the way that we ignore our actions around the world. It's almost as if we only bring up the fact of people's responses, not the thing that caused those people's responses.
Yes, and they talk about it the Russians told him, look, they're going to kill you. If you have missiles facing them, they won't try to kill you anymore. That's what happened. It's in my play. And, that can be proven. That's why they were there. And they're going to go back now because, when we're in Cuba, we found out that the Trump administration told the country that was selling them cooking gas that they couldn't sell it to them anymore. Guess who's selling it to them, guys?
Russia. Or China. It's one or the other.
It's Russia. So Russia's back in, which is what they always wanted to do, was get back in. So
yeah, fascinating stuff. I do want to just ask you real quick, Eduardo, there. The other thought I thought was really interesting of the play specifically is Celia Sanchez, a character that I didn't know much about before the play, and talking about holding elected officials or unelected dictators to the to account in some way. Somebody actually has to speak up and do it. And in your play, you had Celia Sanchez serve that purpose. Maybe just tell us, if you do have a minute extra here to join us on Political Misfits, a little bit about who she was and why she was so important for you to highlight in this play.
Sure. Well, she was, she kept the revolution going when they were all thrown in jail, for real. She raised all the funds. Afterwards, she was the person that was concerned with how the people were being treated in the revolution until she died. And everything else I made up, and it was really, both Celia and Consuelo are different parts of me and what I would have liked to have confronted Fidel with if I ever had the chance. You know what I mean? But yeah. Factual character. She was probably his mistress. She's very well known in Cuba. And she died in 1980, and that's when he went crazy. Also, a lot of the plays about the war in Angola, which was in many ways Fidel becoming an imperialist, but in many ways it was carrying on socialism, and it certainly helped Africa in the end, because Mandela and Fidel became very close friends. So it was, again, a double whammy. Was Fidel there for the oil? Most likely. But he was also there because he believed in justice, right? I think we have to come up with a new term rather than socialist. There's something in the middle that I think has to do with we can no longer allow these corporations to be thought of as people. I think that's the big revolution. People are people. Corporations are money-making machines, and they should not have the same rights. And that's the trouble with the world at this moment, and that's why we're in the middle of a crisis, I believe, because of how the world runs, which is beyond something. Yeah. It's beyond capitalism. It has to be something new. In order.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you. And I thought your play did such a good job of introducing some of those complexities and those debates. We'll actually have quite a bit of time here in the next few weeks to search for answers like you. There were questions and answers there like you were proposing, because I think you're on the right path. Well, a big thank you to playwright Eduardo Machado, the playwright of the brand new play, the brand new play Celia and Fidel here at Arena. stage. Eduardo, thank you again for joining us.
You're welcome. Have a great afternoon. The theater always tells the truth.
Thank you.
Not beholden to soap.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right. Big thank you. Thank you again.
Bye.
Yeah. So Jamarl, a great play, hopefully there, where our theaters will eventually reopen across the country. I know a lot of people are socially isolated, an easy time for depression. So I appreciate all of you out there listening to Political Misfits. We're going to be here the rest of the week, and we'll continue to keep an eye on the coronavirus as it continues to romp through the world's leaders. And have you noticed, Jamarl, Michelle Whitty, our great producer, she's got questions now. Why are so many world leaders' wives testing positive for COVID-19, but not the world leaders themselves? Very interesting, very interesting. One person here, the person in Germany, though, expected to succeed Angela Merkel, Friedrich Merz, has now tested positive for coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, COVID-19 there. He is a heavyweight amongst the Christian Democratic Union. So a lot of more famous people. Michelle also suffering here for many internet boyfriends, I've been told now. I'm going to get it wrong here because I don't follow the show. Christopher Hivju, who played Tormund on Game of Thrones, has announced that he has COVID-19. And Idris Elba, who announced yesterday that he has COVID-19, is scaring Michelle quite a bit. She is praying mightily that our good friend Brandon Sutton, the Twitter handle Pretty Bad Lefty, has nothing more than a cold, because if not, she's going to be in despair. Uber and Lyft, Jamarl, have also suspended pool rides. Dozens of healthcare workers have fallen ill, and this is being described as the tip of the iceberg. Emergency room workers know the risk of their profession, the president of the American College of Emergency Physicians said in a statement. But also suddenly on the front lines are grocery store workers, who I'm not sure ever expected to be on the critical front lines of a dangerous pandemic. Big news here, Jamarl, I thought was quite remarkable. Serbian President Alexander Vučić, European solidarity does not exist, he said. This was a fairy tale. The only country that can help us in this hard situation is the People's Republic of China. For the rest of them, thanks for nothing.
Wow. He said that? That's a quote?
That is a quote from the Serbian president today. Yeah, I mean, everybody here in the United States, New York Times, shame on you for belittling and shaming China for doing the wrong thing, for doing the right thing, for doing nothing, for doing too much. Whatever you said bad about them the last month, maybe you should have been saying, how can we learn from you, and will you help us when it reaches us?
You know, when you think about it, you think back to the United States in the Second World War. And the U.S. had such production capacity that it was able to effectively ramp up production and put two militaries on both sides of the planet, in addition to giving equipment, weapons, bullets, guns, food, et cetera, to the countries that we were allies with. Like, it's hard to get across the level of production capacity that's potential, that allows you to do something like that. And right now, we get most of our masks from China. We get most of our medicines, or at the very least, like aspirins or ibuprofen, from China. I mean, we've lost that production capacity. We've essentially bled that out and sent that over to other countries. So now you have a situation where China builds a hospital in 10 days, and the United States, we are, 10 days behind Italy in regards to the crisis at hand. What a sea change.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable, too. I talked a lot about this senior building here, public housing in Washington, D.C. over the last few days. You're basically standing out front there, Jamarl, yesterday at the Garfield Terrace, a senior projects here in Washington, D.C., and you look across the street and there's two massive luxury condo development projects underway. And you're just saying, why don't we just break into these? We need hotel rooms, we need beds, we need places for people to sleep. Why not these empty luxury condos staring at the face of the most impoverished here in the United States? A big thank you to Eduardo Machado, Dr. Dadi Shari, Paul Jones, Eleanor Goldfield, and all of those who called in today to Political Misfits. We'll be with you remotely the rest of the quarantine here over the next few weeks. So thank you for listening. We'll continue to be with us. We'll talk to everyone tomorrow about the mini Tuesday election results. For myself and Jamarl Thomas, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.